I want to share a very special experience that my wife Claudia had. She is in the restaurant business, and we've had many profound experiences. I've had these experiences at her side in our restaurant. So here it goes. And this is called the Flute. I'd seen him at Walmart, a tall, young-looking 20-year-old employee whose life was about to come back to where he'd left off. He sold us bread for our restaurant, always preparing it fresh for the guests. We invited him and his significant other to join us for a nice meal sometime, and this night was the right one. The couple, Javier and Jessica, loved each part of the meal. I even extended a complimentary dessert out of love for the breads he made for us. Then 2 glasses of delicious red wine, and the perfect tone was set for a great conversation. Javier, Jessica, and my husband John exchanged pleasantries and then entered into sharing parts of their lives. John loves to talk about people's passions, gifts, and favorite things. As the night progressed, it felt like the conversation was coming to the top. But ending it wasn't in the cards. Stay. I've been in conversations like these before. You've said goodbye 5 times, but something doesn't let the conversation end. You stand in the doorway hinting that it's time, but something else must prevail and keep you there. Javier began to talk about his love for classical music. He pressed the button on his phone, and the most beautiful songs emanated from the speaker. As if he was inside the music somehow, he closed his eyes to take it in like a curvy form of incense smoke inhaled through one nostril. The music was the score of the moment. The music began opening a memory box of thought as Javier took us back into his early days as a young boy learning the flute. He felt safe at this point, talking about it, and opened up with great enthusiasm about the topic. His instructor was a concerto player in the symphony, and Javier was on his way to landing in the same shoes. But life had other plans. He'd sold the flute to eat and maintain a healthy life. What he had connected with at that moment was the remembrance of what mattered most to him, as if we'd struck a reservoir of creative energy and deep generative love for playing. More than this was the cord-like, unbreakable connection to a destined being. A door was witnessed that had been there, but had fallen into the background and off the radar. But that night, we brought it back into the foreground. Trigger. So I reached for the laptop. Javier scooted close to me on the couch as he opened his eyes fully to the screen with nail-biting anticipation. I looked up flutes on Craigslist. The photos began to show up, and Javier's breathing changed as he moved in close like hugging a lost loved one with his eyes. He reached out to the screen in a grasping fashion, like a baby would think the television were full of real people talking to them. The flute on the screen had a voice, as if it spoke to Javier. I sensed his deep starvation for this missing thing. It was time to offer what the moment was pregnant with and waiting to be born through me. I told Javier that he will come back home to himself and that we'll buy the $350 flute. I don't know how to describe Javier's face, but I've never seen the face of gratefulness more in my life than right here. He burst into tears. It was as if a long-lost friend had surfaced after half his life and found him again. It was a reunion. It brought him back to center. My husband John undeniably rose to his feet and chanted, "Yes!" The flute was needed. Most of all was this place in Javier that the world needed more than anything. It was showing us what the world needed him to do, what he owed the world, what he loves. As he gazed at the picture of the flute, I wanted this place in him to come out like squeezing a pimple. I was in the presence of grace that night. I saw the eyes of the soul without masks. I could see the resonance this being had with his flute. I knew the flute was searching for him. The world was searching for him to have it. And I was being called to be the vessel from which the keyhole was to open the door. Again. And as tears ran down his cheeks, Javier sensed the miracle emerging from his deepest sorrows into best wishes. I could feel the tingling sense in my chest as my heart's intentions and grand will, which I call soul service, was rising out of the depths of me and pouring through my soul's face and voice. It was as if we had locked souls. I could not do anything but surrender to its commands, like a hypnotic induction had taken over every part of me. After that night, Javier would never be the same man as he was before. Something there needed to die. The disconnection between man and flute ended, and the requiem of the classic music on the cell phone was the perfect lament to celebrate the dead's passing. I thought of the cat who was taken from her home and found her way back to her master. The flute was destined for this musician. I could see the need of me here, so ephemeral, as if everything the future needed in this moment was given to me. Today, Javier is our flute player at the restaurant. He plays the breath of life that I saw in his heart through this hollow instrument, and people melt. Our guests love being in the presence, like I do, of someone who's energized by what they do, like nobody else. Javier was meant to play flute, and this flute player was meant to serve our guests, all in perfect order. Macro. The natural order of the evening, or perhaps the venue itself, appeared to be the extractor of such a performance. Javier didn't play the flute. He played the macro flute. It was the walls and the environment that he'd allow to inhabit his creative urge to play. He always says that this place, that he finds his source from which his playing emerges. And which part did that special night, that night when we all looked at the flute, and I felt what was needed of me, and my presence, and the venue, and the guests that are coming. All of these things have influence. They have a stake in the outcome. They're all key parts to this puzzle that was self-organizing, as if the elements were combined in ensemble to give rise to a sweet return from flute to man. We all felt this moment needed us to come into being. It felt safe, real, natural, and obvious. My inner knowing trusts now that whatever comes into my restaurant is meant to be there. And I'm meant to serve them in the way of the natural order of things, as long as I listen, remain wide open with my heart. The House of Dreams. So what is the purpose of my restaurant? Purposes are like slow hunches. As time goes on, one continues peeling the layers back on this sense. After 5 months, I'd realized the restaurant it wanted something for itself. A warm climate for people to connect and position one another in a certain way. It felt like a house of dreams. As I saw what came of the interactions between guests, they left as different people than they were when they entered. The connections would give rise to innovation, new adventures, and better understandings. I have a house of dreams. Well, by the way, before the night of Javier's reconnection to the flute, I just received some money from a client. And that money I'd made was needed for his gift to be given to the world. It was at this point that I felt the connection that David Bohm talked about in his book, The Implicate Order, that everything is enfolded into everything. We exist within a web of relationships that give rise to causal forces which occur in synchronicity. Relationship between things is is the primary organizing force in the universe. And I could see myself as an actor among a larger system that had a pattern of design and order from within it, because I listened.